Wow, Akua, I gotta admit, I feel intimidated to even release this episode, given given the quality of the present discourse. I'm a little intimidated to release it. I will, but I'm a bit worried.
How exciting! How exciting! Yes, how exciting to be worried. No, it's brilliant. It's about time we helped people come out of, it's just so boring otherwise, so boring. So this is good.
Great. Maybe this is how I'll start the podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Adventures Through the Mind, a podcast exploring topics relevant and related to psychedelic culture, medicine, and research. I am your host, as always, James W. Jesso. Today, we are featuring an interview with Akua Ofosuhene. Akua Ofosuhene is a speaker, radio host, filmmaker, psychedelic designer, and a co-founder of Hub and Culture, an African and Caribbean cooperative lifestyle shop and event space in Peckham. Akua has produced, directed, and shot documentary films in Europe and West Africa, including the commemoration of the life of filmmaker Osama Sembene for Al Jazeera TV. She directed Keep Her, a short drama that won the second Best Newcomer Award for the Images of Black Women Film Festival. She also created a film London-funded Closing the Gap project, which takes positive films about African life into UK schools. She is an advocate of individual therapeutic uses of psychedelics to combat depression, illness, and white supremacy racism. So this interview was recorded on the tail of the release of research done by Monica Williams and Alan Davis about how even a single psychedelic experience can help reduce the trauma of racial injustice. And that's basically what this interview is about, although not so much the research, but about the healing, but also the potential of psychedelics as a tool towards dismantling racism in general and bridging racial divides in the process. During the interview, Akua shares her journey of using psychedelics to regain her personal power by dismantling the, quote, racist within herself and healing the trauma of racial injustices she endured as well. She shares the value she sees of white people using psychedelics for something similar and learning to reject the term whiteness and the identity construct of whiteness in the process. We talk about how racism is sewn into the very foundation of our present system of global capitalism and how that racism expresses itself in the identity of both white people and people of color. And especially, we talk about how the true dismantling of racism is actively harmed by the politics of outrage being carried into our personal relationships, and how getting beyond racism as a society can only come about in a cultural context based on the sacredness of the individual. So as you can tell, we're going to talk quite a bit about racism and quite a bit about white supremacy. And for a lot of people listening, that's a very sensitive issue, and it's possible that that sensitivity leads you to react in one direction or another. And I can appreciate that, and maybe this interview isn't for you. Although I encourage you to see what it is for you, to give it a listen, and kind of hold your thoughts and feelings around it. And if you'd like to share those, you can join us on the subreddit at Adventures Through the Mind, at Mind Podcast, and share your thoughts and feelings there with other people who have listened to the show. And a link to that subreddit will be in the description to this episode. Before we get into the interview, big thanks to my patrons on Patreon, who without their monthly support, I would not be able to be producing this podcast for everybody to engage and appreciate. So thank you very much, patrons, and thank you very much in particular to the people whose names are listed on the screen here on YouTube or in the show notes to this episode, as they have been giving a substantial amount per month, and some of which for a long time. If you, the listener, are not yet a patron and you'd like to support the show, please head to patreon.com/JamesWJesso, where you can become a patron by making a monthly pledge of anywhere from $2 to whatever amount more from there, where each tier of pledge comes with some sort of added benefit. So patreon.com/JamesWJesso and become a patron if that interests you in a way of regularly supporting the show financially. If you just like to do a one-off financial support, you can do so by heading to the links in the description to this episode and leave a PayPal donation or a crypto donation. Thank you so much for supporting the show financially in that way if you are able to. And if you're not able to, please and thank you for sharing the show out and about in the world in whatever way makes sense. So without any further ado, here is my interview with Akua Ofosuhene on Adventures Through the Mind. Enjoy. Akua Ofosuhene, welcome to Adventures Through the Mind. We've got you here on the show today to talk about a very neutral, very calm, very gentle, very, like non-triggering, non-conflicting topic. We're here to talk about racism. And so thanks for joining us on the show.
Thank you, James. Thank you. I'm really, really, really pleased to be here. And I love your intro because really that's how it should be all the time when we talk about racism, instead of the opposite way. So thank you for that great introduction.
Mm-hmm, thanks. What do you mean by that? Like that this is the way we should talk about it and not the opposite way?
I think we're now at a time where we're kind of like a good 1,000 years, if let's say really, really full-on racism 500 years later, we can really afford to just stop being triggered by it and actually just be adults and be honest. I think we all get triggered because there's a lot of dishonesty going on, and that's all involved in the trauma for both sides of wherever people see themselves to be in the argument. There's just so much trauma going on and a lot of denial of the trauma. So it just means that as soon as the word racism comes up, everybody's diving for cover while the other half are charging forward. It should be something that is kind of like, yeah, we've got this problem in our world, in our society, so let's just sit down and acknowledge it and talk about it and see what we can do about it in the spaces that we can control.
Can you speak a little bit more about this? Because I feel like I feel like I'd like to hear like a sort of a deeper dive in what you mean here.
Yeah. So, I mean, I actually think the reason why we have racism isn't the reason why, let's say, me in the UK can suffer from racism. There's a disconnect, or there's a distance from why racism started and why it's kept going, and then the lived experience of black and brown people in the West, or even black and brown people in their home countries. So because of that disconnect of why this system must happen, it makes it really hard to deal with. So it must happen because actually it's the foundations of capitalism. The foundations of capitalism is we must extract labor and products and wealth from other countries that have those things in abundance. It happens to be that those are the places where you have a lot of black and brown people. So that's the start of it, because you're taking away something, not paying for it mostly. In Ghana, where I'm from, our resources, we get the royalty for our resources. We don't actually get paid the real monetary value. Just when cocoa is sold in markets in the UK, when cocoa is sold in those markets, that price that cocoa achieves has got absolutely nothing to do with the price paid for the cocoa in Ghana. And it's the same thing with the gold and all of these other things as well. So to keep that system going, and also to keep eyes off that system, what you have is everywhere there are black and brown people, you've got the system of also keeping their labour also kind of unrelated to the end price of something. But to keep all of that going, you've then got to have a new kind of justification for this system going on. So the justification then is they are not as intelligent, they're not quite as human, they're not, all of this stuff is added on top. So roll forward all these years later, we find ourselves in a space where Black and brown people are encouraged to be trying to be recognized as equal to the way white people are treated in all these different institutions. Now, it's never going to change because it's not the institutions that started the system. That's my whole thing with it. Going to the hospital and finding that actually Black children are given less pain medication than white children. You can try and get the doctors to kind of like acknowledge that, try not to do that. That's not a bad thing. But they didn't start doing that because it was innate in them. They learned that, they were taught that by, if you like, the system that must keep stealing from Black and brown people, because it works as a way to keep everybody's attention away from the source. While we're all sort of fighting for our rights in the police, in the courts, all this stuff, we're not going to the source of the injustice that started the story. So I think that's why, in a way, everybody kind of needs to calm down about racism, because we can still tackle it when it comes in front of us, in the doctors, in the courts, all those places. But if we have at the same time the knowledge of why it started, I think it can help us not become so easily triggered. And also, we all have to accept that we all suffer from racism. Black, brown, yellow, everybody does. It's in the very air that we breathe. So if we start from there and say, okay, we all want to get over racism, we want to stop being racist. To do that, we have to understand that all of us can fall into various pitfalls about racism or being racist at different times. And when somebody says, or it comes up because you're at a tribunal or whatever, you were racist, then actually it can be an investigation. Together you can investigate, shit, this is what happened, this is what I did, this shows that I still have this racist gene in this area. Right, I'm going to get rid of that and I'm not going to do that again. I think we need to be able to get to that place. Does that make sense?
I think it does, yeah. But what I think I want to hear you point at it a bit more, and what I think I hear you saying is that there needs to be a greater understanding of how racism in the person has arisen out of the history of racism being embedded in continued institutions that are still alive today, and that we need to recognize that so we can bring down the temperature of our interactions between people so that the relationships between people become places that racist moments, racist ideologies, racist ideals can be reflected upon and corrected in the confines of relationship, rather than bringing the full heat of our understandable trauma and resistance and anger and whatever else against the institution and how the institution has expressed through people and through structures in our lives against the individual person who happens to be having a racist moment or happens to be blatantly a racist person.
Yeah, totally. And I suppose, I mean, one of the ways in which people can understand about how maybe it was embedded inside of people is when the king of my region of Ghana, the first king who was gotten rid of by the British in 1896, they finally took him away. But there'd been, I think, from about the 17th century, there was 7 different wars between the Asante and the British. And the British took over more and more territory, moving towards the interior of the country where my people are from, the Asante people. by the time they were really ready for the big invasion, because by then they developed the Maxi machine gun, and because up until then they didn't have a machine gun, so all the battles were with, you know, kind of like muskets. So some they lost, some they won. Once they had the machine gun, this changed things. But at the same time, you had newspapers. So there started to be this kind of reporting back to the UK and a lot faster, all these different colonial wars. But they weren't sold to the people, just like kind of what happened with Iraq or what's happening with Syria. It wasn't sold to the people as, we want their gold. It was actually sold to the people as, their king beheads the people and we're going in to save the population. So the name that a lot of people would have heard of is, the guy who started the Scouts. His name has gone from my head, it'll come back. But he was an artist in the British Army, and he drew loads of these pictures that became quite famous. So the idea of the African boiling people in these huge cauldrons, he used to draw those pictures. So there was a picture, a quite famous one that he drew, of our king with his cloth, all these empty shells and human skulls all around this pot and this kind of boiling cauldron. And this was why the British had to come in and save the Asante people from this evil Asante man. So there was a long story of kind of preparing white countries for this idea of these people are below us and we are there actually helping them. And then when they would burn whole villages, then there would be the new pictures of, and we still see the same thing today, of the AIDS people, the ladies so-and-so and sir so-and-so, and they would call the little black children pickaninnies in those days, feeding the pickaninnies with nobody having a context of why are these people starving? Oh, we didn't realize that they had flamethrowers that burnt. So I think, you know, once people can understand that this has been encultured, it's been pushed in, and then also for black populations, like in Ghana, surviving that kind of a loss and then going into the oppressor's education, which is what happened all over the continent and Asia. Everybody went into the oppressor's education. If you wanted to do well, you had the oppressor's education and the oppressor's currency. So whatever currency you had before then was now null and void. If you didn't have work that was either working for the colonizers or somehow trading with the colonizers in their new class systems, you were no longer, you know, whatever position you ever held before, that's now gone. That also then created in the psyche of the people this dependency on the colonizers and this shame of who they were, because they'd lost to the colonizers. You can't get far without the colonizers' language. You know, you're looked at as, oh my God, hasn't he done well? He's working in the parliament now. You know, he's a lawyer now. He's an accountant now. So on both sides, you have this racist ideology in both cultures. In the black and brown culture, it resides as this kind of traumatic shame. So let's lock it away. And then in the white cultures, it resides as we are the saving heroes who are feeding these people, and thank goodness we know what to do with their resources because they don't. I think by people understanding where they are in this story, I hope, well, I feel it's helped me and my family anyway, just to realize that you can kind of be kinder to yourself because you understand where these things have actually come from. So, you know, back in the day when I would feel a bit uncomfortable if I saw a group of black teenagers on a corner, I can now relate that to, that comes from the racist within me. And now I've seen that, I can let that go. And I can actively do things to challenge that person that's going on within me, which then frees me up to be able to deal with if you like, bigger and more invasive kind of like inequality and injustice that comes from the racist point of view. So that kind of answers the question.
Well, I appreciate the sort of local historical, or like, because of it being where you're from, this local historical account of how, you know, like colonialist extractivism and colonialism in general has a track record, you know, an observable track record of based on racism and self-aggrandization on behalf of the colonializers, of like inducing economic instability and social instability and creating a shit ton of harm and havoc, and then presenting this place as this desolate place that then we say, well, you know, now we need to bring civilization to these people to rise them out of this poverty which they've created for themselves. We're the saviors. When the reality is, it's like most of the accounts that we have on what these countries are like are accounts that we have based on the impact of us arriving there. And by us, I'm speaking of the Western movement. I'm kind of identifying a little bit, obviously, with the colonialist, being that I am a direct descendant of that colonialism, or at least part of my bloodline is, and how that embeds certain sort of identity narratives in everybody, right? And how that expresses itself, that racism expresses itself in the individual on either side of the oppressive divide, and that sort of comes up as a type of sort of traumatic identity. And so I'm wondering here, because I mean, what brought us together, other than possibly reality just being wonderful at times, is me being connected to you through Darren Springer, and him having invited you to the Breaking Convention conference a couple of years ago, or 2019, and you gave a talk about, can psychedelics change the racist world order? And you had brought it up in a way that said something like, you were glad that there was a lot of white people in the room because you felt as if what you were trying to offer was a way that was for white people, and that the way towards changing the racist world order is by dismantling our own whiteness, to resist whiteness in a way as an identity. So the question I have here is about how much, again, back in the container of the personal relationships, how much the trauma and the traumatic identification that we have cultivated on either side of the oppression is manipulating, either because we're a direct expression of it or we're a violent reaction to it, is manipulating personal relationships and personal interactions. And by personal, I mean not individual to institution, individual to individual. Manipulating that in a way that creates so much tension and so much conflict that they become places where the trauma and reactive or defensive or whatever gets reinforced increasingly. And that you had suggested that there was some way in which psychedelics help to change that would create a more effective capacity to change the racist way of things in the individual and in an institution. And I'm curious, maybe if you can expand a little bit on that.
I think because I found it really interesting that the more I went into myself about racism, then I realized that there was a universality in it, in that everybody's locked behind a lot of shame and then a lot of kind of being defensive. So I could see that both black and white kind of had those two emotions for different reasons, but you've ended up with those two emotions. So then I was thinking about, in a way, this title of white is so politically charged that actually by accepting that title, it's built in it the defensiveness and the hiding of the shame. And I think, in a way, the controllers or whatever, the master controllers, has been quite clever by getting loads of disparate people from all over Europe to agree to one kind of word, which is white, but actually it's only white because it's against black, brown and yellow. So it's very troubling as an identity, because I think it makes it like then white people have to then be all the things that make that box called white.
Right. Or exclusively a rejection of it from a place of deep shame and guilt and et cetera. And fair enough, there's reasons for shame and guilt in our behavior, but we're talking about this in a dysfunctional and toxic way, or I assume that's what you're inferring. Yeah. Yes,
totally. So I was thinking of, if there's an identity that can be broader, where is it that your people are from? All of those kind of things. What are the traditions that you're from? As one way of being able to kind of find a bit of movement in this kind of sterile box of white. Because once you kind of dismantle it, most of the things that make up the idea of whiteness are not that positive. They're not, it's not about compassion. It's not about caring. It's a very selfish way of looking at the world. And I feel like part of that story has been to almost persuade humanity that actually selfishness is normal. But I actually think when we use our eyes and we actually look at our daily interactions, selfishness is not normal. Capitalism has made loads of bits of it seem like these are normal human characteristics, but they're not. And a lot of it has kind of been encapsulated in the idea of whiteness. So the idea that you should be, or you are going to be afraid of the neighbor you don't know, being natural, actually is not really true. If you look at the broad expanse of human relations and trade over our history. So I kind of felt like white people can use psychedelics to explore who they are in that kind of paradigm, and also really get to the place of, I think, self-compassion helps to spread compassion outwards as well. And when you have to accept these things, I know everybody's talking about the shadow, and I don't like to use the word because I'm not sure if we all mean the same thing, but I think, when one is able to go to those scary places that could be there, we're a bit worried about them. Actually, when we get in there, I think what we find is it's not actually that bad. It could be that bad. And even if it is that bad, so you've done the work then, haven't you? And I think that's what I hope psychedelics can actually also offer the white community, is a safe place to look at that stuff, identify it in oneself, and decide, okay, I was a shit then, and I wasn't. Okay, let me come back anew, because that's all any of us can ever do.
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty interesting, because I'm thinking about the premise that you're offering here, and I'm also recognizing that you have another part where you have a sense of how psychedelics can help. I think the term you use is hewed people with racism internally as well. So let's just put a pin in that. But what I hear you talking about is you're making a presentation to a redemptive quality, like of a redemption possible. That is possible first through acknowledging, like letting yourself see, like how much of this is in me, but not from a sense of so that I can then use guilt and shame as the primary motivator by which I do the opposite, so much as I can see that these things are in me so I can own them from a compassionate place and choose with greater agency to the person I want to be, and the person I'd rather be, with a recognition of what the historical context that bred these moments are, the larger implications of those moments and behaviors and perspectives on people around me, and the type of world and relationships I'd like more ideally to be moving towards. But that's not necessarily a definite thing. You know, people take psychedelics and they come out maybe more racist than they were before, because it's, you know, context is everything. So that said,
basically.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm thinking about now is this redemptive quality to the individual. And maybe this is leaning in towards the role psychedelics play in dismantling of racism in people who are, quote, you know, not white, right? Which is that in order for that redemption to happen, it has to be mutual. Somebody has to be given the opportunity to have made mistakes, recognize those mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and given an opportunity to then attempt to, you know, live as adapted to and responding to and learning from those mistakes, while also having the opportunity to make more mistakes, to recognize, and so on and so forth. And that requires a culture where the heat on this is down, and mistakes and the mistakes aren't sort of immediately responded to as like reason to end this person in some way or another, or to dismantle this person in a lot of ways, in a conflict equals abuse kind of situation. And that abuse should be responded to with greater forms of abuse. And so, and that mistakes in the past are given opportunities to be reviewed as whether or not they were recognized and corrected, rather than, you know, because you made a mistake 10 years ago, you were by default a horrible person, and thus there's no redemptive quality at all. And so, and that is very much the caliber of the conversation, at least as far as it is on social media and Twitter and some of the op-eds that are being written across these larger sort of like media outlets that are attempting to obviously profit on the ideology of social media platforms rather than say anything explicitly, you know, well thought out. But so I'm wondering about that. I'm thinking about Chloe Valdry and her talk, the theory of enchantment, and that the only way to really be properly anti-racist is to first recognize the sacredness of the individual and be moving towards going beyond racism, not necessarily going towards embedding racism deeper and deeper in our interactions and just making sure that those who were and are colored similar to the oppressors are perpetually punished. So I'm wondering, that was just a spiel. I don't know. I could have made some statements in there that I need you to check for me, you know, because I don't see them. But so that's the proposition. I'm putting that out into your world, and I have this other question about where psychedelics fit inside of the other side of that dismantling of white supremacy.
Yeah. I really, really love Chloe's talk. Really interesting person, because I think she's talking about that place that hopefully we can get to once that kind of heat is brought down. And you can recognize in the other their complete humanity. And I like the fact that she does this through art and all of this kind of stuff, because I think she's right that that's the place we want to get to. And I suppose what I'm adding to that is, to be able to get there, we must allow for this, you know, this thing rises in us, we expel it, we go along, it rises again, we expel it, we go along. You know, it's a process, it's getting rid of the layers. There's a lot of layers over a lot of time. But I think if you start the journey on the inside first, then it makes the interaction between people just a little bit easier. Because I think once you started the journey on the inside first, if you're white and somebody says to you, you know, actually what you said in that meeting was a bit racist, or even the way you did blah, blah, blah made me feel blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of just go inwards and ask yourself, what's the truth in that for me? What was happening to me at that time? You don't have to defend your position. You can just say what the truth was for you at that time, and they can say what the truth was for them at that time. And together you can start to find where the other came from. And the other may have been racist, or they may have been in a rush. You know, there's so many things that go on in an interaction. And because of where you may be, you can see something that maybe that person was not there. But if those people can be less defensive and actually can be in an exploratory frame of mind, you can actually explore these things and see where each other came from. Now, let's say the person was just in a rush, but what they said was still hurtful. It can still be, well, you know, that was really hurtful for me because. And then they can be like, oh my God, I'm really sorry. I would never say this to you from that place you heard it from. You know, you can, because communication is complicated. There's what you say, there's what I've heard, but it depends, well, the last time I heard that, or the first time I heard that. You know, we come to communication not as blank people. We come with a lot of history and trauma. And in a way, by going inside first, we can actually be accepting of somebody else's narrative and negotiate a new meaning after an interaction. You know, I'm asking for a real calming down and a real slowness, because really we're wanting to do something extraordinary and we're wanting to break a spell that's been going on for a really, really long time. So I think so person to person, those are, but even those kind of relationships have to be negotiated, because it's very you've got to trust somebody to be able to have that kind of level of communication with them. So it's a lot of work all round, but I think it's really freeing and hopefully really beautiful for anybody who decides to have that kind of relationship in a work setting, or even just between friends.
Mm-hmm. And it's through those types of interactions that the larger problems of racism, both propagating and subjugated to, is going to be resolved personally, but not necessarily institutionally in those interactions. But that's sort of that's where the groundwork comes in. But we can talk maybe about institutional stuff in a minute. I'm thinking about how complicated what you're talking about is. And I can see where psychedelics can come into being in a place where we can be less defensively reactive to certain stuff, but not psychedelics by default, but psychedelics within a certain frame of usage, you know, and similarly, psychotherapy might be able to help together. They might be able to help because it does have a lot to do with healing and resolving around certain wounds. So we're not very defensive in a place, but it's very easy to get locked into an interaction where someone says something that is hurtful, and then you bring it up with them and they don't have any capacity right away to respond to it in any other way than to be defensive, you know, or to gaslight or whatever it is. Right. Yeah. So there's that. And I think in that context, larger communities that are able to, and this is speaking of Sarah Schulman, who wrote a book called Conflict is Not Abuse, larger communities that are able to come in and assess the interaction between those two people and assess realistically, is this a conflict or is this abuse? Is this an opportunity where we need to come in and protect one person from another person's abuse? Or is this a situation where there's a conflict and one or more people need to be supported in a larger context to sort of like own and deconstruct and reconstruct and come back into some sort of recognition of what was actually happening, so there can be more collaboration and harmony, or at the very least, less contrasting conflict and agitation. And that's something that oftentimes I think needs to exist in a larger community, because a two-party system, unless you've got a really awesome foundation already, one based in love, one based in the sacredness of connection and the sacredness of the individual, which Chloe Valdry sort of encourages, then it's really easy for that two-party system just to become like my judgment versus your reactivity, right? For example, or vice versa, or both simultaneously back and forth, right? Which leads me to think about Gabor Mate and his premise of emotional competence, which is that you need to be able to feel your feelings first and foremost, communicate what your feelings are, be able to differentiate between how much what you're feeling is issues from the past and issues that are happening right now, and then be able to, knowing what's of the past and yours to deal with and what's happening right now, know how to assert your boundaries and know what you need to ask for based in what's happening now, and attending in your own self-responsibility to what was an extension of the past. And that without that emotional competence to a certain degree in relationship and community, then it's going to be extremely difficult to be doing what you're doing. And then add in now the quality of the narrative around racism and the very real, generations and generations of trauma and harm and violence that is wrapped up in this. Well, it's obviously a much more complicated situation than can be easily achieved.
Yeah. It's a long haul. It's a really, really long haul. And, it's brilliant you brought in about the emotional competency, because that's really why the work has to start on yourself first, because you can't even get into a situation with somebody else until you've done all of that stuff, because otherwise it's just not even possible to hear somebody else. So it's really that thing of, so many people are on a spiritual path right now. And in there, what's really interesting is still kind of like, racism is one of the things that's kind of really on the bottom of the menu. And I find it so interesting that everybody wants to talk about wholeness, but actually there's kind of like wholeness, but not that one. Let's just gloss over the biggest fracture. But the thing is, it's a fracture that's just part of loads of fractures. And you're not going to achieve wholeness until you've repaired those fractures in yourself. The fracture of sexism, the fracture of racism, all of those things are fractures, but they exist in us first. And so as soon as we realize, oh no, it's terrible that they're burning down all of the forest, then we still have to go in first. Okay, where is that burning down of the forest, that disregard of Mother Nature? Where is that in me? First, everything, we've got to do it in here first, and then we'll be able to do it on the outside. I think the brilliance of the system that we live in is to make us so outward looking that everything is about get it right on the outside. Because I feel like, if you like, the original programmers, because they knew actually it's the other way around, so that's why we've all been directed to look out, because while we're looking out, nothing changes. We think it changes because it's slightly different, but different isn't change to wholeness. And so it's kind of like, we've got this saying, I think it's a northern British saying, we've got to get our big girl pants on and just do what's got to be done, because it's just boring otherwise, as you think of generation after generation constantly on this thing of going outwards rather than coming back inside to do that work there first, so we are free enough in our head to tackle what's happening on the outside.
Yeah, and I think to then tackle what's on the outside is important, because I think the flip side of what you're talking about is also possible. We can get into this place of like, and maybe this is true. I don't think so, but at least it's not the total truth, which is that because I'm doing the work internally, that's enough. Right? Because I'm doing the work internally, becomes like this spiritual narcissism. Like, I'm solving racism by meditating on racism every day, and that's all I do. You know, and so it's like I'm healing myself, and by default of healing myself, the world is healed. And I think this is the type of magical thinking that we often see in psychedelic culture, which is like a sort of a benign version of it, which is like, if I'm doing the personal work, then that's the work. Rather than while I'm doing the personal work, that's the basis by which I can then do the interpersonal work. And then that is the basis by which we can do the institutional work, right? To make these changes. And so that actually applying what we're doing internally into the external world is important. And that's something I want to point to in a second about like responding to institutional racism. But there's two more things I want to explore first. One of which is maybe commentary with space for your response, which is I don't know if you watched the Psychedelic Cafe that I did, which was like, how do we solve the problems in psychedelic culture? And there was a lot about bad actors and corporate influence and all the rest. And I was trying to point to something. Yeah, I was trying to point to something that I'm not sure was entirely evident, or certainly wasn't entirely there, which is that the way in which we're relating with each other is as important as what we're talking about, is as important about what we're trying to change, you know? And so there's these groups of people working together, and they disagree with each other on certain things or in other things. The essence of what they agree on is the same, which is like, we want to protect from bad actors and corporate influence. But the way in which they understand that is different. And so because we have a mindset, which is, or if we hold a mindset, which is we're championing this thing and we're fighting against that thing and so on and so forth, and it's a real defensive, compensational, like violent reaction to try to fight for a thing without a recognition of how much the way in which we show up propagates the very thing we're fighting against, then we end up finding enemies and creating conflict with people who otherwise might be able to be allies. And that if we don't change the way we're relating with each other, if we don't move towards a more collaborative mindset in how we're addressing extreme issues, then we're never really going to solve those issues. We might change some stuff around, and certainly we might be able to change certain things that on the outside seem significant, but the inside, the dynamic of how we're relating is still the same. So I'll give you a space to respond to that, and then I want to ask you about another thing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, because it's the hermetic law of polarization, and we live in a society or in a world that's just built on polarization. So everything ends up being left, right, and that is, once again, it's brilliant if you want to be in control, because actually then the middle's left to you, and actually you can constantly manipulate people and you do what you want and they're not even realizing it. And so you're right, the way in which we actually come together is more important than kind of like, if you like, our starting point. You know, if me and you want to achieve something, it doesn't really matter if how you want to go about it is from a different point of view. We've got to look at the end goal, and we have got to look at, okay, how do we move along? Because we don't have to be of one mind all the time. But I think it would be brilliant if we all learned actually the Hermetic principles at school, because I think it's really good at just making you realize, am I really at the other end of this thing? You know, what's going on then for me if I'm really kind of getting about something? That to me is a sign of, okay, let me just go back in. What is this actually about? What's going on? Because there is always a third way. There's always a third way. But if you're too stuck to where you are, you can't see it because you're defending a position. And I mean, with psychedelics, it's so funny at the moment. The amount of people who 5 years ago were championing psychedelics, now it looks like it's going to be maybe available to everybody. And they're kind of like, oh, no, not everybody. And it's sort of like, oh, when did you move into that camp? But I think that internal kind of polarization kind of means that there starts to be a bit of a fear of everybody jumping on board. You know, no, not everybody. Let's just make sure these people, and then as soon as you're in that polarized position, you actually end up doing the bidding of the situation you were probably fighting for. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, and I can understand wanting to take the position. You know, I can understand trying to defend something sacred from the influence of the profane. You know, and I think that's likely something that relates to the larger conversation about racism that we're talking about, which is Chloe Valder saying the sacredness of the individual, right? But which is not necessarily held, I think, in a lot of the larger public discourse right now. But I want to ask you a little bit about the other side of this sort of, we'll say, a racist moment. Now we're talking about people. We're not talking about institutions. The other side of the racist moment. So we have, assuming that the racist moment is between a light-skinned person and a dark-skinned, a quote white person and a not white person, and the white person is the person speaking of or interacting in a way that is an expression of racism that is hurtful to the individual, right? In that situation, on behalf of the perpetrator, we'll say, you know, it's kind of an intense word, but like the person who occasioned this interaction, like said the thing, it's their role to sort of like be able to check in and like own that they hurt that person and own that was coming from this place that is a place of deep and profound wounding for all people subjugated by it, which is anyone who isn't of the upper echelons of society, which themselves might be deeply traumatized by this. And that might be an extension as to why they seem to be totally okay with having zero empathy or compassion for the impact of their choices as they massively incur as much wealth and whatever as they can. That's the side of that person. What is the role of the other person in this? Because when we had talked previously about this, you had talked about something like something around the lines of needing to something along the lines of seeing racism where there isn't actually racism. Now, you spoke about something last time we talked about this, and I'm curious if you could expand on that from the context of what is the personal work role of the individual who is in that moment receiving harm from a racist moment, you know, and where psychedelics come. This is not a clear question, so I'm hoping you can parse something sensible out of it. But sort of psychedelics, the role of I think I'll let you parse it because I'm digging a hole here. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it's all kind of like where, so let's say it's interpersonal. So, you know, we're staying away from the institutional. So it's interpersonal, people on more or less the kind of same level, but there is a moment in which it becomes easier and sometimes because there's an audience, so it can become easier for a white person to kind of show their power, whether it's in words or in action, kind of not seeing you in the queue, anything. I think when one as a black person, when one's not so traumatized as to kind of like just have this very thin.
Okay, so what you were just saying there, I can't remember the last words that you had spoken, but you were responding to my question. So maybe take it from the top.
Yeah. So I was saying when you have a one-on-one interaction, and there is an upset. Let's just say there's an upset. What I found in myself over the years of actually doing inner work to get rid of the racist inside of me was that every interaction that wasn't agreeable could then be, I was placing that as this person's being racist. What that actually later, what I realized is why that was harmful to my own psyche was I was literally dragging up, if you like, 500 years of pain in every disagreement. That was not good for my psyche. You know, for me, that was not good. When I started understanding about kind of letting go of the racist within, and a lot of that really started with the help of psychedelics to just bring down, bringing down the trauma, the probably, some crazy levels of complex PTSD. When all of that started to come down, then I started to see the space of not actually re-traumatizing myself by allowing for the fact that actually the rest of human interactions go on. And that's been very freeing for me. So then there are times when somebody actually is being racist, maybe, if I can be absolutely sure that they're being racist, maybe they are being racist in that moment. What I found looking back on stuff was actually in the time before I really, really worked on myself, in those moments, I didn't always actually have the power to even be able to react to it, because actually somebody would be bringing up so much trauma that I would then be in freeze. So I wasn't really very powerful. I mean, I remember the one time I was able to get angry in front of a group of racists at Glastonbury Festival. And I realized that, oh my God, that means I've actually worked through something, because actually up until then, I would just I'd be gone. To actually get to the stage to actually get angry was amazing, because I was like, oh my God. But then once that was unleashed, I could see how I could just be pretty angry really quickly. So then I realized actually that was also just the stage, and not a very positive stage, because then your blood pressure is just, constantly going high. I would say now what's interesting, I mean, we've had lockdown for so long, nobody's seeing anybody at the moment. But the few interactions that there has been, maybe they were being racist. I really cannot say. If I'm really, really honest, I could say they were being racist. I really actually don't know when there's been interaction. There's not been any kind of overarching big interactions. But even if there was, I think because I feel differently, it would take a lot for somebody to be able to trigger me in a racist way unless they were being actually physically violent. And I think the letting go of a lot of trauma and letting go also of the racist inside of myself, also what I found it's done is just released the ability to find a third way, to think about solutions in a different way to how I'd always thought about solutions. So I actually think, as we were talking about it before, when people actually really do the inner work, not the ignoring work, I think a lot of people into spirituality are actually getting really good at ignoring things by I'm going in, and no, when you really do the inner work, actually what happens is you have energy for outside work, and you will be doing it in a different way. You're not actually kind of just saying everything is wonderful. I mean, in a way, everything is wonderful, but that doesn't mean it's so wonderful there's nothing to do. It just means that actually things are not as bad as they appear on the news. for individuals, because none of us are, living in all these hotspots 24 hours a day. We live where we live, and what happens where we are may happen where we are, but we're not living, last week in Washington and then this week in Syria. That's not our real human experience. But if you sit in front of the television, your emotions may end up being like, actually, you are going from one trauma to the next trauma, which does make it easier for you to be manipulated and sent to a particular pole, because you're always feeling in threat. Whereas actually, when you're not feeling in threat, you're released to have more creative thoughts about problems as they manifest. So I hope I've kind of
I think that makes sense. You definitely took it to a much larger sort of like discussion there, or racism is a pretty large discussion, but to this discussion of Daniel Schmachtenberger, a guy I follow, he calls it I don't know if he's the first person to call it this, but multi-level narrative warfare, where our embodied emotional energy is attempted to be it's being triggered, and then through multi-level narrative warfare, there's an attempt to get us to allegiance our embodied emotional energy to a particular cause or ideology, which may or may not actually be the one that we think it is. Like the other side might want us to be on this other side in a dysfunctional way, rather than one side wanting us to be on that side. And plus, it's all complicated, and it's all being pushed by social media algorithms, which aren't necessarily serving any particular side except like more attention to the platform. And so, there's just like a wondering about that, and then thinking about what it takes for us to become less reactive and less triggered, and by less reactive and less triggered, more capable of actually allegiancing our embodied emotional energy towards causes that are in greater service to the vision of the future in our interactions and in our world that we have chosen to build collaboratively, rather than as a reactive position based on being subject to this multi-level narrative warfare.
Definitely. I mean, a brilliant example, and forgive me, anybody who was really, really affected by what happened in Washington. But basically, I've been staying somewhere that has a TV, but I don't even know how to turn it on. So I missed everything. So I had a meeting on Monday, but I think on Sunday, I suddenly saw something on social media, and I looked up a few things, and I was just, and I think I phoned my mum, and I was like, what happened in America? Mm-hmm. So then my mum's telling me, and so then I'm looking at stuff again. But to me, not seeing any of the build-up, it just looked so funny. Like I was just like, is this real? So my whole thing was, it just looks really, really funny. So I have a meeting. I have 3 meetings that day with different people, but 2 of the groups are in the media. So they, they're consuming a lot of television, and it was just really interesting that what that stuff had really, really, really put a lot of people in a really depressive state of mind, really, really worried about the world, really kind of like no longer seeing the streets of London like how they saw them 2 weeks ago. And it was just quite an interesting thing that we allow our attention, because we're not being sure enough on the inside, really our attention and our emotions are just played with. And it's really kind of like, to me, I sort of think it is best to really understand that we are creatures that absorb. Like, that's what we are. So we've got to be discerning about what we take in, and to start trying to find more truth from the inside in terms of, where's my equilibrium? Where's my real comfort that comes from inside? Because otherwise we're just tossed, like the wind. And one of the groups, which was a group of journalists, I was quite stunned at how affected people who actually thought that, but I watch all of the news to get all of the sides. And it's like, I didn't say this, but I was thinking, no, you watch all of the news to get all of that one side that's teaching you about fear. There was no two sides. It's just triggering people and making people really, really frightened. But I think the promise and the brilliant thing about psychedelics is when you are ready to use it, to go inside, to find your equilibrium, which is about getting rid of your trauma, it helps you to just find it easier to recognize when you're going off center, when you're letting your sponge body take in too much crap. You kind of recognize that, I need to actually get back to something that is me, that is equal, that is kind of, can look around and really see the truth of who's doing the pulling of the strings. That doesn't mean take against them. I think it's really just about just know, because even going against them is helping them. So it's really about just seeing, right, okay, that was interesting what Trump was doing for the last 4 years, and he said 8, so he didn't do a double term, but not getting involved in evil, and, the other lot, Kamala and her friend, kind of, yes, they're the good guys, and all of this stuff, and not realizing that actually it's a play, and they're playing good cop, bad cop, and 4 years time they'll swap around. It's just seeing things as they really are, rather than getting pulled in to serving the machine that really is just serving the smallest percent of humanity.
I mean, like that feels like a very complex place to go, because then that machine and that theater still has very real interactions on the lives of individuals.
Yeah.
So and then outright rejecting it isn't necessarily the right choice either, because then you become this sort of like, either you just disappear into a forest somewhere and you probably live out the rest of your life before that larger theater eventually crushes down on everything that you care about, or you're isolated in a little pocket. But either way, you're not really contributing to sort of the spiritual project of our generation to actually sort of help recognize, reveal, alter, and change the way things are through the dynamic of our communities and our relationships, which we were talking about, which is also something that, we got to do it within, but we also have to do it between each other, right? We're co-regulatory beings, and we self-regulate, but sometimes it's tough to self-regulate. We need somebody to help co-regulate us, and we need to be in communities where things can come up and we can be co-regulated, and then things can come up that are conflicting, and they're about moments of racism, and so forth, and they're not with our personal friend, they're with someone we kind of know, but then the dynamic, the sort of larger cultural container that holds those interactions allows for the type of collaborative, generative type of stuff that you're talking about. This is a dream vision, and I mean, I think that's somewhere we can be aiming towards. It's somewhere we're very far from, and certainly it's hard enough to sustain in our own homes, let alone on a larger cultural level. And psychedelics might be able to help play a role in that. They might also not, they certainly can use in a particular way, but they won't by default.
No, not by default. No, definitely not by default. It really is wanting to set that intention, and everybody has what it is that they want. I mean, personally, because I'm interested in esoteric knowledge, and I'm interested in not so much why we're here. I'm not even sure if anybody will ever find that out. We're all guessing, but just interested in knowing about the most I can possibly get to know about this experience. And in that search to know the most that I can get to know, I realize that trauma gets in the way. So it's almost a selfish thing of kind of like, how much more does one want to experience? And if you want to experience all there is to experience, then you go unpack your shit that weighs you down so that you can recognize all the nuances that goes on. That's really, I think, what it's about. I think it's actually quite a selfish thing, in a way, to actually want to unpack racism, because in that there is the opportunity to get as close as is possible to experience wholeness. If I can get rid of all the divisions that I can see outside, if I can really do my bit to get rid of them inside of myself, I might not get there before I die, but it's making the world so much more fascinating as this journey continues. It's making interactions with people really, really fascinating and interesting. It's making other cultures really, really fascinating, because the fears that I had before, even with kind of getting into Black politics and Black history, then there can be that polarization that then kind of like says, then don't look at other cultures. But actually by trying to get rid of the division in myself, I love finding out about Hinduism. I love finding out about Islam. I've really enjoyed delving into the Bible, not because I want to be any of those things, but just because they exist. And it's amazing all the different discoveries that people have done, the ways that people have lived. And when we hold these divisions within, we just miss out on so much that's for us to enjoy.
Yeah, like holding divisions rather than recognizing differences. It reminds me of something you had said during that first sort of like big Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. I mean, there was lots, but the big one in 2020 that resulted in a bunch of people putting black squares on their Instagram feeds, which I did not do, because in my mind, I'm like, I'm not solving racism by jumping on the bandwagon of a social media campaign being propagated by large businesses in the music industry. You know, like how can I contribute to this? I did the what it means to be a Black psychedelic advocate cafe, which I invited you on. That was my way of being like, okay, this is a real issue. This is up. This is happening. How can I contribute? This is the way I can contribute to the pocket of culture that I am having some sort of voice in. Right.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned wanting to get to a place where we're beyond, not just beyond racism, but we're beyond race, and we're beyond thinking about it from a division standpoint. And it's not and it gets to a place where we're all interested and exciting about where everyone's ethnic origins come from. And it's not like I'm Black, I'm white. You're like, I'm from Ghana. And I'd be like, oh, I'm actually like a combination of like Wales and French. And my father is also, you know, part First Nations. And it's like, oh, cool. You know, rather than, are you white? Are you Black? Are you left? Are you right? Do you believe, are you racist or are you anti-racist? You know, like these types of divisions that through the polarization of the division only further propagates that which we're fighting against. At least I think that's what you're pointing at, right?
Yeah, that's what I was saying, because and apologies for anybody who's heard it, just to repeat the story a little bit, but it was just so fascinating for me when I moved to Ghana and I started traveling around selling. And I was traveling by bus because we couldn't afford to fly to the places we were going. So we were with very, very working class, I suppose, peasant people. And that was the first place that I really experienced the fascination with difference. And it was almost, it made you want to be even more exotic, because actually the whole bus would be just talking about, oh, this guy is from over there. And then somebody be like, oh, I went there before. My sister married a man from there before. Where are you from? There was just a fascination with all of the differences and all of the trying to find little strings. And the Tuareg people who they live, there's some in Libya, but they're in Mali, Chad, they're all over, nomadic crowds. And what's interesting about them is because they travel around, they've got loads of languages. And Tuaregs are brilliant at having one story about everywhere, because they say that's how you sell. So you meet a Tuareg, they'll say, where are you from? I'm from Ghana. Oh, my father used to sell horses to the Asante king. You know, somebody will say, I'm from the north. Oh, I used to take cattle through there, and I used to, you know, it was, everything was about kind of gathering all these stories from around the continent so that you can make connection. And what I really learned was it was easy for them because they didn't feel threatened by anybody. It wasn't about kind of, you know, I've got to protect something. It was just all about, how can I have a bigger connection with you by learning about you? And it was just so beautiful. And for 5 years, we went to quite a few different countries and got lost a few times, and so many adventures. But I always found the same thing, which was a fascination with you being the other rather than the other way around. And I feel like it's just a switch in the brain. You know, it's nothing really massive. It's a switch in the brain that we just have to undergo, which is just kind of like, let's be fascinated by each other. But I know it's hard to do while we're all still tied to this history, and we're all still tied, you know, to this, it's an egregore. Racism is this massive egregore that lives everywhere, and also we carry one on our shoulder. And you know, if we get rid of the one on our shoulder, the one on the outside will start to fade, and we will be able to correct all the other divisions that we see all around us. That's what I passionately believe anyway.
Yeah, I like your proposition there that it's simple. It's not easy, but it's simple, and we should be working towards it, or we could be working towards it. There are two more things that I want to talk about, even though we've got. Hopefully, are you okay to go a little bit over time?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's two more things I want to talk about. One of which is this. I mean, we've been talking about this idea of like the pro and the anti, you know, are ultimately reinforcing the thing in the middle.
Yeah.
Right. And you have been talking a bunch about, you know, around, so my part of my role, you know, would be to even to get to the place where I can own own the racism that exists inside of me as a consequence of being subjugated to the system of white supremacy. Yeah. And being forced into certain viewpoints and patterns of behavior and et cetera, while also trying to reject whiteness. So acknowledge racism and then try to reject its presence in my life, not from a dissociated standpoint, but from a standpoint of like, I will not let myself be controlled by how this has been embedded in me. Instead, I will move towards interactions and blah, 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 that is envisioned with the world that I'd like to be living in, which includes that not existing as a consequence of that work being done, not as a consequence of denying its existence. Something
exactly.
Right? Something that's
you put it beautifully. You need to write that down and send it to me, because that's it.
Well, we got it recorded. So, and then there's a role that a not white person would play in there as well, something akin to that. But the whole premise is, like you're saying, like to get rid of the racist within, to get rid of the racist off your shoulder. And I'm thinking about stuff like How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. I think that's how you pronounce his name.
Oh, I haven't read that.
Well, it's sort of like a sort of a quintessential, like, this is the book to read if you want to know how to combat racism, which is like, there's only two ways. You're either racist or anti-racist, right? And I believe that anti-racism is the right way to go, but I'd say more in the sense of like Chloe Valdry's like anti-racism based on the sacredness of the individual and trying to get beyond it. Something like Thomas Chatterton Williams talks about, like getting beyond racism, not sort of getting into a place where we have, I don't know, but I don't know enough about the conversation to make any definitive stances of where they're coming from. And I'm just thinking about Chloe Valdry's comments on critical race theory, and that it paints everything as a dynamic between oppressor and oppressed, and that the white people are oppressors and the not white people are the oppressed, and that ultimately neither are anything more than their unconscious involvements in those systems of oppressions, rather than actually being able to be creative, alive, animate agents of choice and change and whatever. And so I'm wondering what you think, because I have a sense of what you're proposing is my way of getting rid of the racist within. But what has your experience been? I know you've talked about it a bit. What is the side of the subjects of racism? What is their role in getting rid of the racism? What does that look like? Not their role, but what does that look like? And what does it look like for you? And what does it look like for your community?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing is, I think it's the same. It's the same journey. So it's that, and it's the crazy thing is, it's the same journey, but it's the journey that probably we have to go on more times because we're going around feeling it more. So what's interesting is probably the ardent racist and, the black or brown person has more occasion to feel the presence of racism. Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting. Those two kind of have the most amount of work to do. So, if you're, so as a black person, like I'll go back to critical race theory. I think it's a step. It's been a step on the way. Mm-hmm. And so a little bit like when I was saying, before that time at Glastonbury, I actually really was not very good at all at confronting racism. And then I went to a stage of getting the anger out, and it was brilliant. I think it's like critical race theory is at that stage. It's at the anger stage. But it's the stage. It moves on. There's this theory of nigrescence. So that's the theory of becoming black, your awareness from childhood. So, and in nigrescence, you go through the angry stage. And after the angry stage, you go to the stage where you won't have anything to do with whiteness at all, as much as you can, cope with in your life. But so kind of not hanging out with white people, not watching white films, being very, very ardent. And then you come out of that stage. And then the last stage is kind of building a life that's just in society and being out of that complete anger. So it's all stages. And I feel like we're kind of, as the whole, our planet anyway, I don't know about the rest of the universe, but it feels like our planet is changing and people are changing. There's some kind of a change. And the Vedic astrologers, they say that we're coming out of the time of the Kali Yuga is coming to an end, and we're moving back into an age of enlightenment. And this is why there is this change, and people are using psychedelics more and all of this kind of stuff. And I mean, I think they say that we're about another 400 years away from the real age of Aquarius, but I think Western astrologers are saying we've entered it. Whatever's going on, something is changing. And so I think this is also changing. We're moving through this. And so I feel kind of for Black people, what we have to do is to do that first layer of work, which is to get rid of the place of re-trauma that says every interaction is racist, because this is what's killing us. This is what's giving us cancer. This is what's raising our blood pressure. this is what is not making us able to think straight about everything we want to think straight on. So just for our own mental health, it's good to start doing that inner work. And then, like I've been saying, it just frees you up a bit to really recognize when things are really needing you to rise to the challenge. So I always give the example of when my son was getting into trouble at school, and we left the UK because I didn't want to bring up my son in a racist country. So it wasn't like I didn't know. We left. But then when we came back, and we came back and he was doing amazing at school and he won the school speech prize. They put him up a year, all of this business. Within 2 terms, then he's getting into trouble. But I never had the presence of mind, and nobody in my family did either, to say, what is going on in your school why this A-grade student is now not doing well? I now understand that little thing that happened that ended up being quite a big thing is my internal racist meant that when the school was telling me he's not getting on, he's not it didn't even occur to me to point the finger at them. It was always, come on, Seren, do this a bit more. Why don't we try this? Let me get, the amount of money I spent on tutors was ridiculous. The amount of money I spent on psychotherapists. But even none of them, not even the psychotherapists. This is how deep the shit really is.
Yeah, the internalized shame you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, everybody pretending that the world is in some kind of a normality. So even the psychotherapist really was not able to pick up on stuff that actually loads of people I know now would be kind of like, you know what, this is not a good space for him. You need to take him out of school. You need to do whatever you need to do to either educate him at home or go back to Ghana, because his life so far is not fitting into this system. Everybody along the line, and myself included, was trying to squash him into the system, completely denying the racist framework that we all live in and operated in. And also his acting out he was acting from a place of deep shame and not feeling worthy and not feeling that he could be in competition with, the white world. And that doesn't just mean just white people, but in the conforming world of people who are doing well in school. When his confidence dropped, it dropped. It really dropped to the lowest place. That kind of lack of confidence that a Black person can get to, because it's inside and it's outside and you're taking it all on. And that's really the freedom for Black people and brown people of letting go of racism, is actually then you really are not able to be another type of victim of it, because in a victim of racism, not just the person who comes up to you. Most of the time, it's not even them. It's the internalized way you keep yourself down. You keep doors closed to yourself. The way you don't push yourself forward because you already believe that you don't belong. But everyone's ashamed of that. So we pretend that's not what we're doing, and that's the real benefit for Black and brown people to undertake this work, is actually then no door is barred to you. Then, you're able to walk in and you're able to match people as much as you are able with your will. You may get there and find actually it is hard to get a seat on the board, but at least you've entered the room. The state we're at the moment is that most people are walking past the building and not even realizing that it's going on, because they are so internally agreeing with all of this stuff that we've been taught about Blackness or brownness.
And then you were saying that the next step after that is being able to connect with your anger and to fight against these things, but that in and of itself is a step And that you're saying critical race theory and the sort of current discourse around racism is an important step towards beyond that, even if the current discourse doesn't seem to recognize a beyond that available. Yeah.
It's good. Everything moves. Everything changes. You know, another Hermetic law, and now it's completely gone to my head, but it's the rhythm, the Hermetic law of rhythm. There is a movement in everything. Nothing remains still. There's an illusion of things remaining still, but nothing remains still. Everything moves. So ideas move. So even people are really, really anti-critical race theory. It's just kind of like, no, you don't even need to do that. It's just to see this is a moving ship. It will transform and it will move into the next bit, but it's serving a purpose. Mm-hmm. You know, maybe a little while back it was serving a purpose. It's now moving into, it's not serving a purpose, which means it's going to be changing into the next wave of what is needed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it'll likely reveal itself again differently at another time, as it does, you know, like trashing in the 90s became canceling in 2020, you know, and like this kind of, you know, call outs became cancels, became, you know, like, so it'll continue to evolve. And I have a friend of mine who I've talked about my fear and concern around how social political discourse is unfolding, not necessarily leaning towards or creating the sort of like, as Charles Eisenstein says, the better world our hearts know is possible, and having some examples of how this is unfolding, and him being like, you just got to trust that this is a part of the larger process, and even movements of, you know, these types of social movements, they're going to make mistakes along the way. And by they, I mean like the movements themselves, and just kind of trust if you just stay participating, stay attentive, you know, but don't necessarily don't become a reaction to your fear about the thing, but stay aware, awake, and responsive, you know, then and just trust that things are unfolding while you actively participate without taking a hard reactive stance in one way or another, then things are gonna at least be moving, generally trending towards the good over time, and assuming that we make it as an entire species long enough to get to a good, we will, you know, fingers crossed, you know, continue to increase our collaboratory capacity. I think that's the word I'm looking for. So yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, and if we don't make it, then we didn't make it. You know, it's like all we can do is just move in the direction that we want to go in. I mean, I'm sure you've seen like some mountain somewhere, and they found a hammer embedded in the mountain, and they were saying that the rock is like millions and millions and millions of years old. So that means at a time when we've been told there were no humans, somebody dropped a hammer that has been there long enough to be encased in, you know, some rock somewhere. I mean, we don't know how many times there's been whatever types of humans. All we have are all these amazing stories from different cultures. Some say that actually this is the sixth version or time of human beings. Some people say that the ancient Egyptians knew that they were losing their powers and their knowledge, and that's why they built the pyramids, so that it would remind us at another time of how much more we human beings can be. I mean, there's so much going on, and there's so much that's gone on in humanity that it helps us to just try and take as wide a view as is possible, wide in time, but also wide in experience. As I told you before, my brother's a healer, but his gifts only started coming along 2.5 years ago. And that's completely blown apart so many ideas that I used to hold, because we actually have somebody in our home who can see inside your brain. And it's kind, you know, and it's like, in the beginning, it's kind of, what do you see? What do you see? And then, we weren't telling lots of people at the beginning because it's like, well, let's see what happens. But I think for the wider family, one of the things that happened that then everybody kind of knew was one of our cousins was, she had a brain tumor. And my brother didn't know about it, but I told him, I think it was like a day before she died, because I realized, oh shit, not everybody knows. And then I said, will you have a look? And then he did his thing, he had a look, and he came back and he said, oh, it started years ago. He was like, it started like decades ago, when I looked at her timeline. And then he goes, but it looks like about 2 or 3 years ago, she had a trauma to the back of her head that then started this new growth. I knew that story. She was a carer, and one of her people hit her with a frying pan. She had to go to hospital, all of this stuff. I mean, the things that human beings can be aware of are beyond what we've been taught we are capable of. So we are more. So all of these things that are difficulties, their problems and stuff, we can solve. Nothing is that hard if the will is there. And that's the thing that I just feel really, really passionate about, is there's so much more to everybody. And once we start tuning into how infinite we really, really are, then we can deal with things, because, so what if you got it a bit wrong that time? There's still today, there's still tomorrow. Don't be holding on to, don't be wrong and strong. I'm always saying this to my son, do not be holding on to that nonsense just because you used to believe, for letting a little chink that maybe you were wrong. That could be what opens you up to an amazing discovery of how much more special you are beyond whatever it was you were really holding on to.
Which is difficult to do when we're deep in trauma, and it's difficult to do when the trauma that we are all understandably in, some of us with more intense recursions than others. So like you said, we're all subjugated and traumatized by white supremacy, but people who aren't white have more frequent incursions and reinforcements of that trauma because they're subject to those racist events and racist institutions. But that we need to, like, when we're stuck in that trauma, and when we're stuck embodying, allegiancing the embodied emotional energy of that trauma towards narratives that serve something beyond the vision of the world that we want to stand in, that we're not even capable of having at this point, then we get stuck. I'm thinking about think globally, act locally, and how that can backfire if how you're told to think globally is being directed in a way that propagates a system that enforces, racism, sexism, subjugation, oppression, economic disparity in locally. And also, can we take a quick pause? I want to ask you about, just as a final thing, because we're running over here, about, like, so what does it look like when we actually stand up to the very real racism of institutions? And what does it look like as somebody who happens to have the same skin color that favors? And what does it look like for the person who has the skin color it subjugates or is against? But I really need to pee, so I'd just like to quickly do that and then ask that question. What's that?
I'll turn on the light while you go for a pee.
Okay, sounds good.
Excellent.
Yeah, so let's round this interview to a close. And we've been doing all this talk about the personal work on either side of the currently still strong socio-cultural racial divide, and you've been pointing towards, like, talking about this from the personal, like, between people in relatively horizontal power positions. And you've been talking about the institutions that propagate and in very much are, like, founded on racist ideals, racist ideologies. So then what does it look like now what does it look like to actually stand up to those institutions? Because they're still real. They're still there,
Yeah.
and we can have a really great, diverse community that celebrates and explores ethnic differences and each other's stories and all positive. And when we walk into a store, I get to walk through it no problem, and you have the owner of the shop following you to make sure you don't steal anything, right? So what does it look like to stand up to those institutions, to sort of dismantle the racism within them?
Yeah. So this is where it's, from what I've seen and what I've experienced, it gets more kind of funny, and you've got to be a bit more cunning, and you've also got to just think more. So, like one of the things I always used to say to my son was like, I really, really want you to learn how to drive, but you've got to, there's this black philosopher called Neely Fuller Jr. And Neely Fuller Jr. says, part of the code of fighting white supremacy is when you are stopped by an authority who's carrying a gun or has the power to end your life, don't fuss, don't fight, don't flee. And some people are kind of like, yeah, well, it's all right, he's saying that, but I really, really, really believe in the Neely Fuller Jr. approach, because that's just being realistic. Mm-hmm. It's part of standing up to the institutional side is to understand what the institutions want to do to you. And then you're then now in a game of chess, and you've got to look at how you behave at different points when you come across the institution. So if a policeman is racist, but you don't fuss, you don't fight, you don't flee, and you manage to get away, well, then there's another time where you can actually take that to the appropriate authorities or get some other backing. There's different times to do what you need to do, because you understand the world that you live in. When you don't understand the world that you live in, and the third time a policeman stopped you is the time you're ready to have a fight, you did not understand the system that you live in. It's about being mature and honest, because just because you're doing the inner work, it doesn't mean the world has changed. The world has not changed. All you're doing is releasing within you what makes you contribute to the worst situation. Or, I said that thing about going to school and never being able to put the school under pressure. But actually, if I had, or if I was supporting somebody now in that situation, I'd have different questions to ask. I'd have different targets that I would put to the headmistress or the person in front of me, and get them to be called to account, to come and account for themselves to me in that time. If I have to go to the hospital, I have to know what they're like. I make it my mission, and actually I think all citizens should do this, not just Black citizens, but I make it my mission to know as much about what could be wrong with me before I go and see any doctor, because they're not always on my side. Not everything can be cured with a particular type of tablet. So it's calling for a radical responsibility, but also realism. There is a time to fight, but you've got to pick your battles, and you've got to pick it in the place and time that's going to suit you the most. You're not always going to win even, but at least you're going to be approaching stuff from a different point of view, not from a triggered point of view. If I'm doing something, I'm organizing something at the moment where an ex-policeman has got in touch, and he says that he knows some people in the police who'd like to probably be involved. Policemen as individuals are just like everybody else. As an institution, okay, so I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking about, okay, what things I would want them to answer for their participation. I want something from that. It's a level of honesty. If they can't give me that, if we can't have a platform where we can get a certain level of honesty. I want a discussion where it's not them sitting quietly while a bunch of black people tell them about how racist they are. No, I want them to tell us what they know about them in relation to how they deal with us. If they can't do that, they can stay where they are. I think what this thing does is it gives you power, as much power as you can have. It's not that you're taking power away from them. You're just dealing with them from a point of view of really understanding what's going on and not from a triggered point of view. So all of this I'm talking about is not going to end the system next year. That, you know, it's going to take a very long time, but at least everybody going in can have their eyes open. And that's as much as I was saying, everything changes. Right now, that's probably as much as we can hope for. But also, when your eyes are open, I mean, this is the next thing I'm going to say. I can't say all of it because there's a business thing there. But everybody in Ghana is all about gold. And most of the gold is taken by the biggest companies and only a tiny bit is left for the ordinary people. I don't think it's an accident that now there's a group of us who's realized there's something else that everybody is ignoring. And I think we've only seen there's something else because slowly we've been getting ourselves out of this oppositional kind of thing where all we're doing is thinking about them. What it does is it frees you to think in a different way, because with human beings, there's this philosophical idea that everything arrives with its other side. So if this oppression is how it is, the other side, the freedom is there. We just need to get ourselves mentally out of it so we can see the other side. So it's a process. And so I kind of always hope that going forward, I hope that I'll be able to just keep finding stuff to unpack so that as I come into more contact with places of power, if that be, I won't be triggered into behaving how they want, but actually I'll be able to see the loophole that changes the dynamic in terms of what I need at the time. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, it's an answer to the question. I feel that there's another layer of that question I want to ask in a second, because it sounded like you were talking very much from the position of like, as a person of color, this is the way to respond. And I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts on someone like myself, maybe specifically me, if you feel like there are things that you think could be encouragements for me personally, or just like people who are in a similar type position as myself. But what I'm hearing is interesting, because it's like you're talking about getting to a place where the racist within and the trauma is minimized enough so that you can assess and strategically respond to the reality of the world that you're in under the vision of like which fights most serve the larger vision of ending racism and which ones are likely to create a polar dynamic that invites harsher racism upon you. And that's different in different circumstances. It's different between, like you walking down the street and some drunk dude calling you, dropping the N-bomb, and somebody in like those kids at Glastonbury, how you respond to that would be different if you're empowered. And then how you respond to police officers would be different. How would you respond to a medical person, the principal of your school or members of the school board? That would all be different. And that also the reality is like, it's still going to hurt. And there's still going to be a pain. The trauma's still there. The repeated incursion of racism is still there. And that's when you lean back in the community of people who have been doing the work. And you walk back and you go into this community of people and you're like, oh, yeah, this happened to me, and people can be together and like, yeah, I acknowledge that. They can hold you with where you're at. They can hold your anger. They can hold your shame. They can hold the whatever. And always sort of holding it in a place of like helping you come back to equilibrium. So collectively, we can all step back into the fray, without becoming victims or casualties of it. Right. Exactly. Does that feel like I've gotten a sense of what you're saying? Absolutely. And that's also where, kind of regular-ish use of psychedelics can also help. Tapping, I tap so often
I do my tapping, I will apply Byron Katie. All of these are ways to be able to just let some of this stuff out, because it's not going to stop. And having a different mindset doesn't stop it. It's really about traversing this world that we find ourselves in, well, as we are moving towards a certain way of being and understanding. So in those moments where one might be with somebody who's sanctioned by the state to kind of carry on that project that they have, that's probably not the time to use the normal ways to try and get them to see your humanity. One of the things that Neelis Fuller Jr. used to do when he was younger, he was really big in the unions and helping workers. And what he used to say is, you go to their rules, and you only speak from their rules, and you talk about what rules have been broken by said boss, and you get the other people on side to investigate the rules. There's so many ways of being, and he used to win loads and loads and loads of cases because he would never go in, especially in the 50s or 60s, where nobody gave a damn if you were going to go in saying this person's being racist. No, he would just go in with, that rule was broken, that rule was broken, and that rule was broken. Why the rules were broken was not his concern, and that's not why a tribunal or whatever had been called anyway. It's about what are the rules that have been broken. So, of course, sometimes, it's not all the time it would work, but it was just another strategy. And I think that's really what this time that we're in is about, is, okay, which strategy can really move the bar a bit more? I mean, when I went on the Black Lives Matter march 4 years ago, and my son had told me it wasn't going to work, but halfway in the march was when I just thought, God, Akua, what are you doing? Marching down Oxford Street, shouting, like, who the fuck are you shouting at? Like, I felt like such a dickhead. And I was with my friend, and I had to get to the end of the march because I was also too embarrassed to leave the march. But it was like a moment of enlightenment for me. Not everyone can do what they want, but for me at that moment, I realized my purpose is not best served marching down the street, shouting whatever we were shouting. I didn't believe in it anymore. I was done with that story. But I would have I had to do it to be done with that story. I had to be in that flow of realizing, I've been marching on and off since I was 14 years old, and nothing I've marched for has come to pass. So is there another way? Is there another way? And it was really helpful to just step away from that type of activism. But something else may happen where, I went on another march that felt like, yes, this, after the girls, I was in Ghana, and the girls in Nigeria had been taken by Boko Haram, and a group of us marched to the Nigerian embassy, and that felt like a worthwhile march, because it was also really just to say to those people there, we're in another country and we stand in solidarity with the parents whose children have been taken away. That one felt like it was going somewhere, and the ambassador came out and all of this kind of stuff. But kind of marching down Oxford Street, shouting Black Lives Matter, really actually made me feel quite sick inside. I was really just like, it made me shudder. I was not comfortable at all. Not comfortable at all.
And yet the march itself, would you say, did serve a role in the larger social movement around, like, bringing more attention to the existence of racism within English culture? Do you feel like it served a role, even if it also felt like something that you no longer felt was moving towards where you wanted to go?
I mean, it's an interesting one, that, because it definitely started, George Floyd started conversations that were not being had. So that definitely was an impetus to, or an allowing of having the conversation. Because I think what happens is, in the culture, it's going on, but then something happens and everybody's like, oh my God, it's going on. It's like, it never fucking stops.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the funny thing about all of this stuff. So, politically, maybe why I'm more skeptical about Black Lives Matter is I'm skeptical about all organizations, if I'm honest, because I feel like if you want to tear something down, the first thing you do is you give them an organization. Because you give them an organization, you give them loads of airtime, you give them loads of what feels like reach, and you take it down. You nobble it at the knees, and then everything it stood for, it's gone. Right. As if problem has gone because the leader was found doing whatever.
Sure, or because one chapter of Black Lives Matter was doing something violent, you can put that on the media and say all like Black Lives Matter is this and that. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So I'm very skeptical of organizations, really.
So wait, let me pause, because I realize I think I'm stopping you from answering the question I just asked, and my apologies. But looking at our time, I want to get this last question in, and then bid you well. And the question is, I asked about like how do we respond to institutions. And, you were responding, I was feeding it back to you from a we standpoint, but you were talking, from like as a person of color inside the system of racism. And I heard, and I feel like I understand what your thoughts were on myself as a person who is not classified as a person of color, how I could best respond to racism to dismantle it. From a personal standpoint, and I'm curious what your thoughts are for facing it on an institutional level. Coming at it from being of the color that is of the oppressor.
Yeah. So that's a really, really interesting one, because then that takes it back to the person. So inside the institution are human beings, individual human beings uphold whatever it is that the institution is meant to uphold. That's the place where individual white people can have power to actually affect change. So the headmistress can have, if she's doing the inside work, she can, in certain moments in the school, how it's run, that's where then she affects the institution from where she is. That's where everybody can. So the chief of police, we had an amazing policeman who was head of Brixton Police for quite a while, who was really talking in a way that nobody else was. And they did eventually get rid of him, but it still changed things. It changed things in Brixton in terms of drug policy, because he was, and I don't even think we've even still to this day had another white policeman who is senior come out and actually say our drugs policy is not good and is racist, and I'm going to have my men constantly arresting young black guys for cannabis while we ignore all the white people for cocaine. It's because that's where human beings actually are. So if you're really working on yourself, you will know what part is being played, let's say in your department, and you by yourself can choose to play in those moments where things are in front of you, because there are the people who have the energy for the big fight, and they are amazing. And that's what I know. A lot of people who are in Extinction Rebellion, they have the energy for the big fight, and they're really, you need all of it. And then you've got the people, the rest of us, who don't have the energy for the big fight, but we've got the energy for the fight that happens in front of us. And depending on where you are in wherever you are, you can do that in your sphere. When my son was going through his stuff, we had an amazing policeman who was honest with me. And I've spoken to so many police, but there was one policeman who decided to just see us as a mother and son, and in a way kind of broke ranks and told us a lot of stuff, or told me a lot of stuff about what was happening with the police, told me a lot of stuff about what was really going on in my son's school. In that moment, he could have carried on the party line of sitting opposite me going, oh dear, and not saying any more. Mm-hmm. But actually, he went that step further and really gave me information that was extra helpful, and not even making his organization look good. You know, he was honest. And that's all we can ever, that's how we break it, is person by person where you are, really, really being human. There's a policeman who, he actually spoke out against child abuse and ended up losing his career and all of this stuff. There are people who see stuff and maybe they'll just drink. And there are other people who they decide, no, I can't actually be part of this. I will actively do what I can. And that's all we can do. Mm-hmm. That's all we can do, is just wherever it is. What is it Darren always says about you've got to get in where you fit in? So even for the revolutionaries, you've got to do what you can do from your heart. But if you haven't cleaned out your heart, it's very hard to act from that place of integrity and honesty and fairness and with compassion.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And then also in all of that, being perpetually attentive to and willing to recognize the history and the founding precepts that brought, through history where you're at. Not just I'm doing the compassion work, but I'm doing the compassion work that recognizes where things are based on where they've come from and the precepts that brought it through where they came from to where they are, and how they're alive in me, and then how I relate to those things, and how can I do some stuff in myself in a way that allows me to work in favor of something different. So I appreciate you sharing that. And I appreciate everything that you've offered here today. It's a very long interview. You offered a lot. We've had multiple rounds trying to get this started, and you stayed diligent and willing. And yes, I'm very grateful. Thank you so much, Akua, for being on the show.
Me too. Thank you so much for putting so succinctly and clearly all the things that I want to say. It's brilliant. You need to write my book. You're brilliant.
I'm having a hard enough time writing my own right now. Sorry.
I know, that's the breaks, isn't it? It's a complete pain in the ass. But no, this has been absolutely brilliant. I really, really, really had a good time. It's really good to get the thinking juices going. So thank you. Thanks very much.
Is there any links you'd like to leave people with to follow up with you after this is done?
Yes, I can be found on social media, all of them. Well, not all of them, but Facebook, Instagram, under my name, or my local dressmaker. That pretty much comes up everywhere. That's the best way.
Great. All right. So on that note, thank you again, Akua, for being on the show, and I look forward to the next conversation that comes up between us.
Yes. The next time is you on mine. So
hey,
we'll say.
I'm into it. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, and cut. Okay, that's our interview. I hope you enjoyed it. Lots of particularly sensitive topics. So if enjoyment was not the experience you had, I hope that it was something that you will be able to chew on in a way that the chewing brings forth the nourishment of something different or insightful or something that adds to your understanding of the topic in some way or another. If you're interested in following Akua's work, following the regular Facebook Live interview show that she does, or her other work, head to the links that are contained in the description to this episode, in the show notes to jameswjesso.com to get linked over to Akua. And if you'd like to support the show financially, Patreon is an awesome option, but you could also do one-time PayPal or crypto donations. Links to do so are in the description to this episode. If you like the show in general, please sign up for the newsletter, the email newsletter. It doesn't go out very often, but it is a way in which you can keep in touch with me and I can keep in touch with you, and without the reliance of the big social media tech platforms to facilitate that, because, well, who knows what's going to happen at any given moment. So, yeah, sign up for the newsletter. That's all. Thank you so much for listening. And there is one more thing. If you want to discuss this episode, please head to the ATTMind podcast subreddit where you can discuss it. That'll be linked in the show notes to this episode. Chances are a lot of you will be discussing it on YouTube as well, which is fine. But you can also do so over on the subreddit. YouTube sometimes doesn't exactly have the highest caliber of discourse around social topics such as racism. So I invite you to jump over to the subreddit and participate in that community of discussion if you're interested. Okay, so now that's really all. Thank you for tuning in for this episode, and I will see you on the next one. And until then, take care.